All right. Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Welcome to the Great Reality Book Study. Let's excuse me. I want to jump right into it because we have a lot to cover tonight. We might go a little bit over because I want to get Bill's story done. Um, Last time we looked at Bill's unmanageability, in which we point out 30 doom curves that led to his bottom. And, you know, we ended last week talking about how dark it was before the dawn. It was the beginning of his last of all, and he would know a new life. Tonight we're going to look into Bill's shift into God consciousness. You will see um, Bill was someone wasn't interested in having God, and let's see what happens. Let's go to page 1 real quick. We're going to do a little comparison where it says 22. So 22, and a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader, for I had not been the man of my battery given me special token appreciation. My talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me the head of vast enterprises, and I would manage with the utmost of my assurance. So he has big dreams at 22. Let's fast forward to let's go to page 8. Let's see where his big dreams are right now. And some of us can relate with this. Page 8. So he had these dreams of, a leader of vast enterprises. Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen with a certain satisfaction, reflected that there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through the night and the next day. My wife was at work, and I wondered whether I dare hide a bottle, uh, hide a full bottle of gin near the head of the bed. So he's got big plans there. I would need it before daylight. That's because his obsession, his plans, his ideas, his leadership, vast enterprise is now centered around booze. That's what his life has become. Listen, now we start a new journey with Bill. My musing and his thinking, his daydreaming, maybe thinking about vast enterprises again, was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. That was Edwin Throckmorton Thatcher, more commonly known as we just call him Ebby. He was sober. You notice the italic writing there, sober. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Remember, had it he'd been committed for alcoholic insanity. Remember, we talked about the Niebuhr asylums, and alcoholic insanity was a term used where people committed to those asylums. And Ebby had been assigned to the asylum at Brattleboro, and it's a horrible, nasty, dirty place it was, and the kind of place where alcoholics were lucky to get out of. And they're always glad to have you back in there, in a warped way. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course, he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, he's just like, screw him. I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. That was the time we chartered an airplane to New York. I'm sorry, chartered an airplane to complete a JAG. So Ebby and Bill had this really big idea. So a new airfield was, they're in Manchester, Vermont. There's going to be a grand opening of an airfield, and they were going to have a big, huge celebration for the first plane that landed. So Ebby and Bill were like, hey, let's go rent a plane. And they drank and got completely shit-faced on the plane, excuse my French, but got smashed. And there was a huge welcome committee, gathering. Like a band started playing for the first, here comes the first plane. Ebby and Bill stepped out and fell flat on their faces drunk. That was the JAG they did. His coming was an oasis, a dreary desert of fertility that means hopelessness. The word, the word oasis means escape. So what was Bill trying to escape from? The dark world of hopelessness. So he knows he's hopeless. Look what he says, the very thing an oasis, drinkers are like that, always seeking escape. That's why one reason why we drink. Think about it. We drank because we wanted to feel different or whatever it was. But then we get in that dark world where we have the allergy obsession. We get in that dark world of drinking to escape life. And it's that double-edged sword, you know. The door opened, he stood there, fresh skin and glowing. There was something about his eyes. What do you see in a person's eyes? You see the truth. That's what they say, the eyes are the windows of the soul. I remember in 1995-ish, I was really in bad shape. And a friend of mine, Kyle, had come by to visit me. And me and him did some running back in the day, and he didn't look like that anymore. He was fresh skinned and glowing, and his eyes just looked different, and my eyes were sunken and hollow, exact opposite. See what it says here. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? So what does he do? He pushes a drink across the table. That's the best, that's what happens. He refused it. Disappointed, but curious, I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. So he's like, what happened? He offered him a drink. He refused it. So now Bill's getting kind of interested. Come, come on, I critted. He looked straight at me and simply but smilingly said, "I've got religion." So you know, um, saying he's saying I've got religion, and pass it on. What he said was he might as well have hit me in the face with a mop, and that's pass it on is we're going to be referring to tonight quite a bit, and that's Bill's autobiography they wrote for him. It says, so getting religion was the last thing on Bill's mind. So here's Bill's prejudice. I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I expect a little crackpot about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right. But bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, his gin would last longer than his preaching. But look at this. He did no ranting. Matter of fact, he told me how two men appeared in court, persuading the judge to spend his commitment. So Ebby was painting houses up in the mountains of New England. And what had happened was he had a brother that looked a lot like him that was basically was in law enforcement. And so his brother kept getting, you know, saying that, oh, it was you that did it. Kept getting all these things up against him. So he sent Ebby up in the mountains. And so he's up in the mountains painting houses up in New England, and a bunch of pigeons landed on a fresh new paint job. And he decided the best thing to get rid of the pigeons was a shotgun. So he started blasting away. Then and neighbors called the police. And the other thing that happened is he basically drove into someone's house who was having breakfast and asked for a cup of coffee. He did that too. So he was pretty famous up in the mountains there. The two men who appeared in court were Roland Hazard, and that's a certain American businessman. We've seen this book. Seba Graves. And the judge was Seba Graves's father. So in those days, when a drunk would go to court, three things, could happen. If friends showed up, they might put him in their custody. If no one showed up, they go to jail. But they've been committed to the asylum before, they're going back to the asylum. That's usually what happened. And so they're there to hope Ebby doesn't go get committed, again, because he's been there before. But the judge had seen what the Oxford group had done for Seba, and so he thought, you guys take him to those groups and stuff like that, I'll put you in your custody. So they put him in Roland's care. See what else it says. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That's the Oxford Group principles. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. I mean, thank God Ebby wasn't bringing the message to Bill today. At 2 months, they wouldn't let him in the door. He said he can't sponsor. Yeah, thank God he didn't wait a year. But he brings the message to Bill. So basically, Roland sponsored him. I'm gonna say sponsored him, and they did call it sponsorship, but it was different, a different look at it. But he took him up in the mountains, and the thing that was different about that was, Roland did it kind of different because you're supposed to do it at the Oxford Group house or wherever they have the meeting house, and you're supposed to do it with several different people as your interviewer and then your sponsor. Roland just took him up in the mountains, right? And he did those procedures. I'm going to mention those procedures real quick again. So the first Oxford Group procedure was surrender our past, present, and future into God's keeping and direction. Two was a sharing our sins and temptation with another life given to God. That was their confession. Three, restitution to all those we have wronged directly and indirectly. That was their amends. Four, listening to God's guidance and carrying out. That's like their step 11. And five, keep the conversion experience real by carrying the Oxford Group message of salvation to others. That was like their 12. Something that's interesting is when Roland returned from Europe working with Carl Jung, and I mentioned this before, and when I did the history, he went to Boston to work with the Emmanuel movement's top psychiatrist, Courtney Baylor, who did a thing called Reconstruction, and he believed that a spiritual approach and was an advocate of moral inventory. So I don't know what moral inventory consisted of. He did, but my personal theory is it's similar to what Bill puts in this book, and that Roland would pass it on to Ebby and Ebby to Bill, because they didn't do moral inventory in Oxford Group. They just did confession. They didn't like write out any inventory. They wrote down some things they did. This sounded interesting. So let's see what else it says. He had come to pass his experience along to me if I care to have it. It doesn't say, he came to take Bill to a meeting. He came to pass the spiritual solution to him. I was shocked, but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be. I was hopeless. You're not going to be interested in anyone's spiritual solutions unless you're hopeless. Bill is hopeless here. He couldn't solve his problems using human resources. He's accepting what Ebby has to say because he's got nothing else to do. Everything's failed. He's broken, defeated. It's in a way, it's almost like he took step one. Brokenness is not an end. It's a foreshadow to a new life, because beyond brokenness is this new world waiting to be discovered. See what else it says. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays way over there in the hillside. There was that pre-offered temperance pledge I never signed. My grandfather's good nature, contentment of some of the church folks and their doings, his insight that these fears really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. His fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. Those recollections welled up from the past in me so hard. So Bill's grandfather was a very outspoken guy. I'd mentioned this before. The meat cutter was the preacher in town. So the guy had a double job. He was the butcher and the preacher. And the butcher, the preacher butcher, we'll call him, got caught doctoring the meat scale. So guys like Bill's grandfather, who wanted to throw him under the bus because he didn't want anything to do with religion, said, "Hey, look, I told you guys." And he pointed that out to Bill. And Bill idolized his grandfather. Look what else it says. The wartime day at the an old Winchester Cathedral came back. Remember, he in fear over there, he went over there and had a little experience. We'll get more into that. But I always believed in the power greater than myself. And I often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. So remember, you know, he prayed to something that day. Something happened, was never able to fully comprehend it. I believe there might, be something, he thought, but you know, I think he was clueless how to connect to it. I mean, I thought the same thing. I mean, I had moments when I looked around and saw the beauty of life and saw that, there might be more on a starlit night, whatever. But my problems couldn't get past, you know, My problem was I couldn't get past the idea of the punishing God and judgmental God that I was conditioned with and raised on as a child. I could not just throw my hands up in the air and say, I have no choice. I'll embrace this. I'll give in. It just wasn't going to happen. And at the same time, you know, the idea of a God that might be all loving had my interest because I never took any action to experience that. And, since I didn't believe that there could be a God that's all loving it, you know, because I was filled with so much anger. I think that's kind of what Bill's going through here too. I mean, I always, today I know within me there's unconditional love, and it's not based on another's worthiness to be loved. It's just there, you know, to love all aspect, and I think everybody wants that. Look what he says. I was not an atheist. Few people really are. That means blind faith in the strange proposition that the universe originates in a cipher and aimlessly reaches nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, astronomers, even the evolutionists suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite the contraindications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlie all. How could there be so much precise immutable law and no intelligence? Pretty deep stuff there. I simply had to believe in the spirit of the universe and in another time, the limitation. That was as far as I got. I mean, the first time I read this, it hit me pretty hard. If a person asked me if I believe in God, I would say, no, I'm atheist. I mean, I went to Catholic school, but struggled with, the dogma. I did everything was supposed to do, altar boy, everything. But I was, you know, fascinated with the loving ways of Christ and Saint Francis and the saints and all that. I wanted what they talked about, happiness and love. But some, like I said, I would stare up in the sky and say, just, something put this together, I would say. But my mind would just go close. And it was because my prejudices towards religion at that time. I couldn't grasp the idea of God, even though I wanted the same thing that a person of God has, happiness and love. That's why I always say in AA, when someone says they're an atheist, I've never been around this for almost 25 years. I've never met an atheist in AA. They say they are, but they're looking for happiness, love. It sounds like consciousness to me. Just my observation. With ministers in the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength and direction, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut. So I was closed-minded against such a theory. You know, th- that's just, in the same breath, we say, I mean, I would say God's vengeance and then someone else would say he's all loving. I was too scared to say, anything. I needed a new idea of God. And I think that's what's happening here. Look at this. To Christ I conceived the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teachings most excellent. For myself, I adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult, and the rest I discarded. The rest I discarded. You know, I relate with this passage from actual experience, and the actual experience was that I would see people say they follow the ways of Christ, and they would quote the Bible, and they could say all the great stuff in there, but didn't walk the walk. And I wanted to see that. But here's the truth: I wanted to see people's flaws. Now, this passage I just read, it didn't make much sense to me until, it made me, it never made me look in the mirror until my grand sponsor during a book study changed the paragraph a little bit. I don't like to change the words in the big book too often, but this one goes perfect. So I'm going to change to Christ to AA. I'm going to read it back. To AA, I concede the certainty of a great program, not so closely followed by those who claimed it. Its morals teaching is most excellent. For myself, I adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult, and the rest I discarded. They call that take what you want and leave the rest program. That was the way I looked at the steps. They also call cafeteria style recovery. Do the steps that are convenient. That's not the program of recovery contained in this book. If you do all this, it's the same thing. If you do all the steps but don't sponsor, you're not doing the steps anymore. It's all the steps. And just, like if you do 14, 9 and stop with 10, same idea. But that was my old program. I took the ones that are convenient, the rest I discarded. The wars which had been fought, the burnings and tyranny, religious dispute had facilitated, made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religious of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since the power of God in human affairs was negligible, the brotherhood of man, a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed boss universal, and he certainly had me. So with all the closed-minded he had towards God, there's one thing he couldn't escape. He has all these ideas towards God, but the one thing he couldn't escape was right in front of him. But my friend sat before me, and he made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he couldn't do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up, and like myself, he admitted complete defeat. When you admit complete defeat, you are ready for a solution. If you have not admitted complete defeat, you're not ready for a solution, and everything's going to say is wrong. But if you admit complete defeat, you're going to hear a lot of things that you want to hear. Everything's right. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from a scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. So he's seeing this. He's not like blind. Had this power originated in him? Obviously, it had not. There had been more power. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that moment. And that was none at all. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in the human heart, which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the table. He shouted great tidings. I saw my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on different footing, his roots grasped new soil. So different footing means complete transformation of personality change, and it's sufficient to leading to being sufficient to bring out recovery. So despite the living examples of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. That means anger, aroused anger in him. And when he thought was expressed, there might be a God personal to me, this feeling intensified. Anger got stronger, right? So on one hand, he's interested in the spiritual life. On the other hand, his friend in front of him, because of his friend in front of him. On the other hand, he can't escape the anger he has towards religion. And it's just this whole aspect of that God. Here's why. I didn't like the idea. I could go so much as a conception as a creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but resisted the thought of Czar of heavens, however loving his sway might be. I have since talked to scores of men who felt the same way. So, I mean, besides not being able to get past the punishing God and judgmental God, there was, for me, there was a thought that, God was this old man up in the clouds. That's what I thought. And that was a hard thing. The czar of the heavens, as he's talking about. And, plus on that, he's punishing, he's vengeful, he's mean, he's not there, all this stuff. And I was 31 years old. That was my conception of God when I walked in here. I had a child's conception of God. They called the Santa Claus God. But look what Ebby says next. And this changes everything. Everything. And this is not an Oxford Group idea. Far from it. Because Oxford Group members did not like the God as you understand him part. It was a Christian movement. Look what he says. My friend suggested what seemed a novel idea. That means a new idea, a brand new idea. Never heard this before. Why don't you choose your own conception of God? So that new idea, or should I say, original idea, is one of the main reasons AA has thrived for what, 88 years. And without that idea, I mean, the 12 steps would never work. They would never get off the ground. We would just be another system attempting, a traditional template, some aspect of it, or another religious group. But the idea that an alcoholic can choose his own, think about that. Just the idea that we can choose our own concept of God. Think about how that widening of the doorway let thousands of alcoholics come in. Full liberty of belief and no end of varieties of relief about belief. Think about that. It gets rid of the feeling that you're on trial to choose your own conception of God. You must follow this God or else, or whatever God there is. But the simplicity of our choose yourself spirituality makes the steps work. You're giving the freedom to act accordingly to the direction your heart takes you. That's the beauty of it. If it was one type of God, the seeker would have expectations of what God's supposed to be or what he's supposed to look like, and what there's no expectations. That's why a movement is of the people, by the people, for the people, time tested, people approved. So what's interesting is Ebby, like I said, he's a member of the Oxford group. It's a Christian group. It's an Alba idea. It's a revolutionary thing, he said. I'm pretty sure it's from his own brain. For myself, it was a foreign idea. Like Bill, I had all these, preconceived ideas about God. I considered myself non-religious and wanted nothing to do with, Christian ideas. But when I was told to choose my own conception of God, because that got interesting. I was like, so I'm all against Christian ideas to the sponsor. I don't want anything to do with that. And he's saying, you can have a simpler God, whatever God you want. And he said, choose your own conception. I'm like, wait a minute, you can't do that. That's not allowed. And my sponsor looks at me and he goes, for someone who doesn't want to follow these Christian ideas, you still follow them. Because I never truly abandoned that conditioning I had. It was still there. So I needed to let them all go. All of them. I need a new idea, not the old one. And I thought it was like breaking the rules. Maybe that's why, and maybe that's why it's a radical movement. It is, there's a lot of church groups that said that about us in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. AA just breaks the rules for the spiritual approach. Thank God we do. My friends suggested, within seeing the novel idea, why don't you choose your own conception of God? That statement hit me hard. It melted away the intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived in and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. Think about it. I mean, how long have you stood at that intellectual mountain? Just ask yourself that. Or how long did you? It was only a matter of being willing to believe, ready to believe. Just willing to believe in a power greater than yourself, than myself. Nothing more was required for me to make my beginning. Wow. Yeah, people always say in recovery that you got to believe in step 2. You got to believe in God, or can't move forward. I heard that before. It's not true. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. And look at his confidence. Would I have it? Of course I would. So you just have to take step 2. I've heard people say, all these ideas about step 2. I don't want to rant on that, but thus I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At long last, I felt the believed scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. He started to experience the vital sixth sense, the God consciousness. He's starting to live beyond his animal instincts. He's starting to see a widening of he's starting to comprehend there's something beyond the third dimension. The real significance of my experience in a cathedral bursts upon me. Again, remember Bill's in fear over there, right? And he's at war, and he had an experience that day, but he realizes when he prayed, something happened. Well, here's what happened. He's going to describe it now. What happened in that Winchester Cathedral on that war day when he first got there. For a brief moment, I needed and wanted God. There had been a humbling willingness to have him with me, and he came. So God revealed himself to him that day. But soon the sense of his presence was blotted out by worldly clamors. That means demands and resentments, right? Most of those within myself. And so it had been ever since, how blind I had been. He realized right then, he closed his mind off from truly experiencing God in the cathedral. Even more important, he realized he'd been that way ever since. How blind he was, how blind we are, you know. Reminds me of when I hear the word blind, that reminds me of a man named John Newton. And John Newton was a slave trader who traveled to Africa to the auction blocks, and I think it was 1748. This storm threatened to sink his boat, and he was an atheist, and he basically said, God, if you get me through this, I'll change my life. And that night he had a crisis of consciousness, and he heard the cries of the slaves in the boat. All of them he had taken across, the waters. And he promised that since he survived, he will, fight in slavery. And he did. And in 1772, he wrote a hymn called Faith, Review, and Expectations. And it would become the most recognizable and most recorded song in the history of the world. A song that's given hope to the hopeless, you know, we can, soften the heart of the hard. The song is Amazing Grace. And where it says in there, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was once lost, but now I'm found. How blind I had, you know, I was once lost, but now I see. To was blind, but now I see. I'm gonna say, and Bill's entering that. That's the blind part reminds me of that. So after Ebby left Bill, Bill continues drinking for a few days, couple days, and then a couple days later, Shep Cornell shows up. So in the first meeting with Bill and Ebby, the thing is, I'm gonna try to put this in perspective that may not sound exactly like it's in this book, but from my studying how he did the steps. Ebby had, was pretty mellow with the OG stuff, right? The Oxford Group stuff. And Shep was more confrontational and aggressive, in your face, say. And he lay out, but he knew how to, but he was the guy you called on to lay out the Oxford Group way of life. And after they left, Bill was pissed off. He's like, screw that Shep guy. He wanted to find him and beat him up. Basically, he was mad. And the next day he was motivated because so he decided to go to Calvary Missions because he wanted to see what this Oxford Group thing was all about. And this is exactly what Shep had wanted to do to Bill. So Bill goes to the used clothing store and buys an expensive suit because he thought that these guys must all be rich guys, and that's what he did. So how he impressed. That's why he walked the golf courses and all that. He always wanted to impress. So he drank at home, had a few drinks, and then he hit a few bars on the way to Calvary. And he met a guy in the bar that asked him where he's going, and he goes, Oxford Group. He goes, oh, I'll go there with you. And so Bill, if I'm not comfortable going in, you go with me. But something happened when Bill walked in. First of all, he stood out in a suit because no one else was in a suit. These guys were like rolled up sleeves and, just look like normal dudes. And he knows that many of the men at the diner were people that were the drunks in the alleyways, the guys from the delicatessens and the speakeasies he used to drink at. Many of them he bought alcohol from, probably other stuff. but they all looked different like Ebby. And now he was realizing, well, this is serious. So now he's like even more wowed. And he breaks bread with these guys and has dinner and talks to them and hears some good stuff. And he thought that was the gathering, but then this big bell rings and these doors opened up to the back into a chapel, and everything got serious. And Bill and his friend, you know, Bill decided to be more disruptive because he didn't want to like be. He started mocking it. Truth was, he was scared, and it's just a sacred event. And the leader of the meeting basically did like an altar call. He asked everyone to come up to the altar who wanted to offer themselves to God. And as Bill sat there, he started to recognizing these men that he used to drink with and saw as drunks were praying like they were cancer patients, begging for their lives. And Bill was automatically drawn up to the altar, and he sincerely handed himself over to God that night, or started his journey. So maybe it's like you could say that's his third step. But he was not like super ready. I mean, he drank for a few more days, but not smashed, anything like that. But the idea, the experience at the missions did not leave his head, and he started to finally see alcohol was this condition that he was destroying his mind, body, and soul. So on December 11th, 1934, 39-year-old Bill Wilson had a deep desire to return to towns. So he left a note for Lois with 6 cents in his pocket and left. And he managed to obtain 4 bottles of beer on the way. And he reached the hospital. He sees Silkworth. He's like, "Hey, I'm back." And he's got like 2 bottles in each hand, you know. Um, and here's what he says. This is going to get deep stuff now. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise before I showed sign of DTs. Now this is kind of like a third step again. There, I humbly offer myself to God, as I understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care. So that, he's completely under his care. Step 3, I admitted for the first time for myself, I was nothing, and that without him, I was lost. So that's 2. I really faced my sins, 4 and 5, and became willing to have my newfound friend taken away root and branch. Not had drink since. He didn't say he did the steps, he's willing to have my friend. He's basically making a decision to move forward, to face his sins, and is willing to have this God to take everything away. So now Ebby comes back to the hospital, or comes to the hospital first time. So my schoolmate visited me, and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. That's 4 and 5. He made a list of we made a list of people I had hurt or whom I felt I had resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrongs. Never was I to be critical of them. I was trained all matters of my ability. Now, I talked to lots of people, and a lot of people say that he's got a spiritual experience in it, but this work he did was probably after that. But I think it's more the willingness. But the interesting things he says here, we made a list of all the people I'd hurt and whom I felt had resentment. So resentments and harms he did, right? Written down. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrongs. Never has to be critical of them. It sounds like interesting. He made amends for resentment, which something my sponsorship line still pushes, and a lot of people don't. And I'll get more to that when we get to resentment. My grandpa say anything that clogs your mind. How free do you want to be? I would test my new thinking of my new God conscious within. That's the developing of the 6th sense, the God conscious, the awareness of the higher self. Common sense become uncommon sense, step 10. So the more you do step 10, the more you see the things, your common sense is no longer common with people. It's, we think of common sense that if you slam your finger in a door, you pull your finger away out of the door eventually the next time you do it. But our common sense is I'm going to figure this stuff out. I'm going to tell the people, they're wrong and I'm right and blah, blah, blah. Common sense would become uncommon sense. You see it differently. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for the direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Step 11. In other words, I pray for my own selfish ends. And he talked about this a lot in this book too. Never to pray for our own selfish ends, except when, as my requests were borne, my usefulness to others, that was foreign to me. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. My friends, so Ebby here, my friend promised when these things were done, I would enter a new relationship. See, so he's saying when these things were done, that sounds like he's explaining the steps to him. My friend promised when these things were done, we enter a new relationship with my creator. That's the spiritual awakening. That I would have the elements of way of living which answered some of my problems. No, all of my problems. And it doesn't say problem that would solve my problem. It says answered all my problems. Right? Belief in the power of God, step 2. Plus enough willingness, step 3. Honesty, 4 and 5. Humility, 6 through 9. To establish and maintain 10, 11, 12. The order of things were essential requirements, necessary requirements. So belief in power of God, 2. Enough willingness, 3. Honesty, 4 and 5. Humility, 6 through 9. To establish and maintain 10, 11, 12. The new order of things were essential requirements. Simple but not easy. That's kind of interesting. Simple, but it's not easy. I always say the steps are simple, but yet they're complex, right? A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn all things to the Father of light, which receives every soul. All things, any lengths. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals. But the moment I fully accepted them, underline accepted, we'll come back to that. When I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound spiritual experience. So it's sudden spiritual experience, sudden, overwhelming shift into God consciousness, followed at once by a vast change in the feeling outlook. Now, spiritual awakening is a slower shift into God consciousness, right? And they both bring personality change sufficient to bring our recovery. I had a experience when I did 6 and 7 that absolutely changed my whole perspective of life, everything in an instant. So I want to set up this entire scenario. So after arriving at Towns on December 11th, Bill's slept for a day and a half. Abby came to visit him on the 13th, and they continued to go on the Oxford Group principles or observe him, whatever they did. I believe this when Bill actually, started doing some of them, but after Abby left, Bill laid in silence, thinking about his life. And, he could hear Silkworth talking to a patient's wife. Now, when Bill arrived at Towns, that on the 11th, he heard Silkworth telling this woman her husband would die of wet brain or DTs, just like Silkworth had told Lois, to remind him of the conversation. Now he's laying in a hospital bed after Abby left, thinking about each change in his life, and he hears Silkworth tell the guy's wife her husband had died. And this solidified Bill's bottom. And what happened next would spearhead the most revolutionary movement that would save the lives of millions that for thousands of years never had a chance to get saved. I'm going to read Pass It On, page 119. This is from page 119 of Pass It On. Now there was nothing ahead but death or madness. This was the finish, the jumping off place. The terrifying darkness had become complete. In agony of spirit, I again thought of the cancer of alcoholism, which had now consumed me and the mind, spirit, and soon the body. The abyss gaps before me, and his helplessness and desperation, I cried out, I'll do anything, anything at all. I reached the point of utter deflation, a state of complete, absolute surrender. With neither faith nor hope, I cried, if there is a God, let him show himself. What happened next was electric. Suddenly, my room blazed with indescribably white light. I was seized with an ecstasy beyond description. Every joy I had ever known was paled by comparison. The light ecstasy, I was conscious of nothing else for a time. Then in the mind's eye, there was a mountain. I stood upon its summit where a great wind blew. A wind not of air, but of spirit. And great clean wind, it blew right through me. Then came the blazing thought, you are a free man. I know not at all how long I remained in this state, but finally the light and ecstasy subsided. I again saw the wall of my room. As I became more quiet, a great peace stole over me, and this was accompanied by the sensation difficult to describe. I became conscious of a presence which seemed like a veritable sea of living spirit. I lay on the new shores of a new world. This, I thought, must be the great reality, the God of the preachers. Savoring my new world, I remained in that state for a long time. I seemed to be possessed by the absolute and curious conviction deep in that no matter how wrong things seemed to be, there could be no question the ultimate rights of God's universe. For the first time, I felt I really belonged. I knew that I was loved and could love in return. I thank God who had given me a glimpse of his absolute self. Even though a pilgrim on an uncertain highway, I need to be concerned no more, for I had just glimpsed the great beyond. This is my release from alcoholism, from the alcohol obsession was immediate. At once I knew I was a free man. Bill Wilson had just had his 39th birthday and he still had half his life ahead of him. He always said that after the experience, he never again doubted the existence of God. He never took another drink. Now I want to point something out. It said these were revolutionary, drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. Now, even though the book outlines how he did them on 13, I believe before this, he experienced only the steps he had done, like one and, a version, there was no 1, 2, and 3, but a version of one and, defeat and, you know, willingness to believe in God and turning his life over to missions like he did. But he says, these are revolutionary drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, that's why I underline accepted them, the effect was electric. The moment he decided, it does not say the moment I worked them or did them. It says that when I accepted them. So I believe that even after the third step, he was still stuck on Ebby told him about, the God he was raised on versus the God Ebby, had described to him. So he's stuck on what Ebby was talking about and the old idea. And I think he sat there about them and he let them both go. He wiped the table clean and had an experience. And I relate with that from my own personal experience. The same thing happened to me when I just wiped the table clean. And when I read that, it makes all sense in the world. I'm going to read some from A Comes of Age, page 63. This is right before spiritual experience. And listen to this. My depression deepened unbearably, and finally it seemed to me as though I was at the bottom of a pit. I still gagged very badly at the notion of a power greater than myself, but finally, just for that moment, the last veg of my old proud obstinacy was crushed. He crushed it, and then boom, experience. Page 14. For a moment, I was alarmed and I called my friend, the doctor. So rather than reading from the big book right here, we know what Silkworth says. I'm going to read from a little more details from Pass It On. And this is what Silkworth says to Bill, because it's a little bit deeper. Bill, was always grateful for what he says. Basically, am I crazy? He says, yes, oh boy, you are sane, perfectly sane in my judgment. You've been the subject of some great psychic occurrence, something I don't understand. I read about these things in books, but I've never seen one myself before. Remember, he worked with 40,000 alcoholics. I've never seen this happen before to anybody. You have had some kind of conversion experience. Whatever the experience, he said, you already are a different individual. So my boy, whatever you got now, you better hold on to it. It's so much better than what you were hours ago. Sounds like Silkworth's describing what he talked on Doctor's Pain and Psychic Change. Think about it for a second. This is what happened today in a hospital. Doctor would have just came in and said, "Oh, you got a visionary? Take this pill. You take this pill and forget about everything." He didn't have that happen. Back to the book. The doctor now sees many men who have had such experiences. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given to me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. This is from a letter Bill wrote in 1961 to the Grapevine. In the wake of my spiritual experience, there came a vision society of alcoholics. If each sufferer were to carry the news of hopelessness to alcoholism to each new prospect, I love this, a chain reaction can be set in motion, forming an ever-growing fellowship of alcoholics whose mission would be to visit the caves of the still suffering and set them free. As each dedicated himself to carrying the message to another, and those released to others, such a society could pyramid to tremendous proportions, each transmitting his experience chain style. It could reach every single alcoholic in the world capable of honestly enough to admit his own defeat. That's visionary words right there from a visionary. Remember, there's a chapter in here called Vision for You. Only spiritually awake people have visions. And Bill was spiritually awake, and that's his vision. He saw the light and he realized he wanted to share this with all of us. And I believe Bill had this experience because it was a calling. He was the right person for the job, and like I said, he offers, serenity and grace of a new life to people that for thousands of years had zero chance, zero. Page 14. This might be the most important paragraph of this whole thing. There's a lot of good stuff here. My friend had emphasized absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. It's kind of like step 12. The question is, what are the principles, 4 through 9, right? We become awakened and we keep growing. And here's the second portion of carrying the message part, 12. Particularly was an imperative, very important, to work with others that he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how upon true for the alcoholic. So here's a promise. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through working self-sacrifice for others, he would surely not survive his trials and low spots ahead. Does that sound like a selfish program? Yeah, people will say, "Oh, this is a selfish program." It's not. It's a selfless program for very selfish people. Nothing about being selfish is ever good. The only time there's a selfish program is when you're not carrying the message. It is insane when people call this a self-help organization or a selfish program where the aim is destruction of self. Think about that. Look what it says next. If he did not work, he would surely drink again. If he drank, he would surely die. Then faith will be dead. Indeed, with us, it's just like that. I mean, how often do you hear, someone stand up at a meeting and say, the reason I drank again because I failed to affect and enlarge my spiritual life. Or the reason I drank again because my sexual behavior continued to hurt other people, something like that. Or the reason I drank again because I failed to stay in fit spiritual condition. You don't. People say I drank again because I wasn't going to enough meetings, so I need to go to more meetings. That's what people say. We're so blind. Whenever a person relapses, it's not about what they did. It's what they didn't do. It's always about what they didn't do. I'm going to read from Pass It On again. And this is a really deep part here. From 125 of Pass It On. How did Lois respond to Bill's new condition? When she came home, she found a note saying he had gone to towns once again. She was very angry. Who was going to pay the bill? Because it was a very expensive place. What good would it do anyhow? He's just going to drink again the minute he leaves. That's a thought, any wife whose husband been to rehab multiple times. It's valid. Her questions were answered, she said, the minute she saw him. I knew something overwhelming had happened to him. His eyes were filled with light. His whole being expressed hope and joy. From that moment on, I shared his confidence in the future. And at last, we did have a future. It was a miraculous ending to a bleak year, a year that had seen Bill hospitalized 4 times. 4 times. The depression had not loosened its grip on us. Bill's career was in ruins. There's not even certain how long we could continue to live at Clinton Street in an apartment. But Bill and Lois were deeply awed by the powerful new idea that had changed their lives in 1 second. Any wife or husband who's been through the pain of a real alcoholic, when they see the light turn on the eyes, they don't question it. They know something's going on. Page 15. My wife and I, Bill and Lois, abandoned ourselves with the enthusiasm of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. So 20 years ago, I abandoned myself to helping others. My life's completely centered today on the opposite of what it used to be. It's a wonderful life. It was fortunate for my old business associates to remain skeptical for 1.5 years, for which I found little work. You see the shift in there for a second? He was all about money before. The stock market and all that stuff. Fat checks and paper millions and all that. Now he's fortunate he can't find work so he can help people. It's a shift to helping others. Something new is driving him. So that instinct, that pocketbook instinct he had, the emotional, material security that drove him is no longer there. I was not too well at the time. I was plagued by ways of self-pity and resentment. That's all, you will do if you don't do the steps. You'll be plagued by that. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found when all the measures failed, I went to a meeting. No, it says when all the measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. Many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair, and talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. Design living which works in rough going. I thank God every day when I get to work with someone. We commenced to make many fast friends, real friends, no longer fair weather. And a fellowship has grown up among us, which is a wonderful thing to be a part of. The joy of living, even under pressure and difficulty. I love this next part. Many of us have experienced this. I have seen hundreds of families set on their feet in the path that really goes somewhere. Have seen the most impossible domestic situations rightened, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I've seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in society. In their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standings. There's scarcely any form of trouble or misery which cannot be overcome among us. I have seen amazing moments sober, but nothing. I've had some powerful moments, kids being born and stuff, and it's just amazing, but nothing compares, or rather my kid being born, I'll say. Nothing compares when I helped another to find that life within themselves, and they can be led back home again to the spirit. There's nothing like that. To see the lights turn back on again. And they look at you in the eyes and they say, "Thank you for saving my life." When in truth, it's just a book and God. It's done all the work. But man, it's a great thing to be a part of. I've seen people who had nothing, you know, had nothing, complete turn their life back around, homeless people, all sorts of things. I've known men who spent more time in prison than out, turn their lives around and never look back. I've had sponsees who are homeless tell me their dreams. One guy, during his fifth step, took on a menu with a listing of the restaurant on it. 8 years later, he opened up that restaurant in San Francisco. He's one of the most famous chefs in the city today. I've witnessed divorce marriages start again, all sorts of things. I know men and women who've lost their children because of addiction, have amazing relationship with their kids today. You can't write a script this beautiful we get to see. You can't. And one Western city, that's Akron, and it's envisions there's 100 of us. 1,000 of us in our families. We meet frequently so we can dump our shit on people. No, we meet frequently so newcomers can find the fellowship they seek. Newcomers, what's the fellowship newcomers seek? They want a way out. Sadly, newcomers kind of wander around AA days at times, it seems like, from meeting to meeting, trying to find a way out. And they don't find it. I've a group that the groups I used to go to back in the day, when a newcomer would wander over to the literature table, someone would go up and talk to them. And it's happened 4 or 5 times in the last couple of months. I just see them standing over there, no one talking to them. So I do. You know, so many are, never find it. It's up to us to carry this message at meetings. It's up to us to say this stuff. At these informal gatherings, one may often find 50 to 200 persons. We're growing in numbers and power. An alcoholic in his cups is an unloving creature. It's a powerful statement. An alcoholic who's dry and malicious life full of reality hasn't found a solution is also an unloving creature. It's a horrible place to be, dry, without your anesthetic. That's why we need something new. Our struggles with them are very strenuous and comic and tragic. One chap committed suicide in their home. There's a lawyer also named Bill, and he lived in Bill's house for a year and stuck his head in the oven, a gas oven. He could not or would not see our way of life. Go to 58 really quick. We read this a million times and seen this a million times. Rarely does a person fail who sturdily followed our path. Those who do recover are those people who do not recover are people who cannot and will not completely give themselves a simple program. Are you a cannot or will not? I mean, the the cannot is a person that's just closed-minded, but the will not is a person who says, I'm not going to make amends. A guy said in the books the other night, he says, there's no will nots in AA. Yes, there is. There's cannots and there's will nots. And the cannots have not truly been offered this program the way they should be, but the will nots are the ones we struggle with the most. I'm not going to make those amends. I'm not going to make amends, or I'm not going to sponsor. And the recipe is not there. There's, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some would be shocked at our seeming worldliness and levity, but just underneath it is a deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day or we perish. Notice that it does not say sobriety has to work 24 hours a day or we perish. But people interpreted that as that and created the term one day at a time from that sentence. It says faith has to work 24 hours a day. What he's gracefully telling us is we must have faith 24 hours a day, 24-hour plan. Think about that. Is your faith a 24-hour plan? Or we perish. Most of us have to look no further for utopia. We have it right here and now. Each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen, Abby and Bill, multiplies itself in a worldly circle of peace and earth and goodwill to men. It says he said we need look no further for utopia. Utopia means a perfect paradise. And Bill originally wrote heaven on his first, I don't think it was in the manuscript, I think it was in the first writing. But he was told by Fritz Mayo, who was in the Christian committee, the evangelistical Christians, they called the conservatives. So he says, I get what you're saying, but you better not piss people off by saying that. So he changed it to utopia. But my question is this: do you have to wait until the end of your life to experience this beautiful paradise we call heaven? Or we're told about? Can we experience it right here now? Yes, it's called heaven on earth. But it's not a physical location, heaven on earth, it's a state of being. It's this condition of the utmost happiness and peace of mind we can have every day, as long as we're doing what Bill just laid out for us. So, and if we find a place of absolute love where there's no judgment, where kindness and compassion and harmony is our heartbeat. It's right here now in everything we do. You can have it, but there's a condition. You have to stop letting your ego and instincts guide you to false fulfillments and let the spirit within be your guide. That's the change. That's something only the steps can do. I guess it could be the reason we're all still here, because a lot of us should be dead, right? Or maybe the reason we're also here because there's others that we need to help find heaven on earth. For me, heaven on earth is sitting down. I'm doing it right now too. You're sitting out with another alcoholic. And just, how can I help? If one thing that stands out tonight in the story is the closed-mindedness of Bill. And you can't let your closed-minded block out the truth. And the moment you fully accepted them, the steps, boom. Next week, we're going to get into start the meat potatoes and get into directions and all sorts of stuff when there's a solution. So I'm going to stop the recording.